So good day, everyone. As I've mentioned, we're going to be having the lesson on data processing. And as I've mentioned, the data is any raw fact. It could just be your favorite foods. But then when we transform it into information, it's because we have meaningful data. So that's the difference between data. Information is data in context. Types of data will be numeric or character data. From the word numeric, it means that it is filled with numbers from 0 to 9 digits, even including decimal points, and can be computed. But character data cannot be computed because these are just string data or graphical data. And string data could be alphabetic data, meaning letters, or alphanumeric data, meaning numbers. Like your cell phone number could be a character data. For the graphical data, it could be charts or pictures, and that is still considered data. Now, information is when that available data or those available data will then become meaningful through the use of a situation like who, which, when, why, what, how. Questions will be answered, like what is your order? So let's say your order is one kare-kare, one crispy pata, and the prices along with them. Now, when you are using information, data is processed. So we have the processing cycle, which converts your data into useful information. So there's input, process, and output, or IPO. Input means it's the process which the collected data is transformed into a form that the computer can understand. And as I've mentioned, you can actually be hearing the word or the letter A, but in the computer, what it's here or what it understands is binary language like 0001, 00000. So through input, what happens is the alphabet or text that we type using our keyboard will then be transformed into what we call as binary language, which is the computer language. And after input, we also have to know there are activities that are part of input. So like verification, when you're logging into Facebook and you type your username and password, then sometimes you get an error message like invalid username or password. That means that the computer is verifying the data which you inputted. So that's why it's called verification. It determines if the data is or information is correct. Then coding. After inputting the data like your username and password in Facebook, the computer will now convert that verified data into machine readable form. So like what I mentioned, into zeros and ones, so that the computer understands it. It then stores the information. So like Facebook will have what we call its own database or storage of your records. Then, so let's say it's already stored and be processed. So when you say processing, that means the data is being manipulated through either classifying, sorting, calculating, summarizing, comparing, etc. And this is how the process works. So you have your instructions for the computer. So this is the user's instructions. Then the next step will be the instructions will be sent to the central processing unit, and the data, which was then inputted by the user, will then be redirected to the respective software. So with that, the data processing cycle is also further implemented with the data manipulation technique. So I said, kung sasampa kayo sa barko, like what happened to my brother, there could be the ship you will be assigned. Example, just an example like have Idasol, example ng pirate ship, ship ahoy. So what happens here is that seamen will then be classified. Like, kunyari, doon siya sa Idasol na barko, isa naman sa pirate ship, isa sa ship ahoy. And then they will also have their own date of embarkation, date of embarking, meaning kailan sila sasampa sa barko. So we also have storing, calculations, and summarizing. So that is for classifying. The data is classified into different groups or subgroups. For storing, like what I said, it can be stored in the database of, let's say, Magsaysay shipping lines, as an example. And it can also be arranged either alphabetically or from recent to oldest in a certain order. So after storing, then calculation takes place. For example, those seamen in Idasol will have their salaries computed. And like, how long will be the contract? Example, my brother's contract is 8 months. Example, in Idasol. So he has a certain salary, and that is using the calculation process, which the Magsaysay shipping lines did. Then afterwards, summarizing. So the data is processed to represent it in a summarized form. So this is when you actually have reports. Like you can see, in school, right? You have the number, the percentage of students who passed or failed a certain exam. It could also be the number of seamen who are already done with their contract in Magsaysay shipping lines. Number of seamen who will be again given another contract in another shipping company, and so on and so forth. And then we also have output. For output, after completing the processing step, this is generated. So the main purpose is to get the result. And mostly the output is stored on a storage media. So example, you have first the activities of output are as follows. So retrieval, output stored on the storage media can be retrieved at any time. So let's go back to my analogy. So you have, let's say, Mario Santos. He's a seaman, and in order for him to be deployed again to another ship, so Magsaysay shipping lines will check his records in their database of all the seamen in their records. So his seaman's booklet, if it's not yet expired, they will check it. They will also check his salary and so on. That is through retrieval. Now, what about decoding? For decoding, the generated output will now be converted into different forms. It can be a report, it can be a chart, and so on and so forth. Communication, this means that the generated output is sent to different places. It can be sent through email, or it can be also sent through like chats, like what we're doing now. So it depends. It could also be sent through a video conference. So after knowing the following output activities, now let's go to the storage stage. So you're done with input, process, output. Now the data will be stored. So this is now the additional step to the data processing cycle. And for future use, that file will also be stored in order for the shipping company or the stakeholders to keep using it. Now, for the types of data processing, the first one on the list is manual data processing. This is more like you have paper and like before when you say manual, man, from the word man, it's somebody will be typing the data. So that's why it's called man. Okay. And then EDP is electronic data processing. And then real time is what you call batch processing. And I'm sorry, real-time processing. And the last is batch processing. So let's go further with Manual data processing, as I said, it's really a human being is inputting the data. So from the word data entry, that means that person is the one typing the data. So example, it could be the HR employee is typing the salary and then computing it. The problem with this is there could be errors. What if nagkamali siya ng type? Instead of the salary being 70,000, nalagay niya 700,000, no? Typo error. Dapat 70,000. But the HR employee type was 700,000, which is wrong, right? So that's why you could have errors because of the human intervention. And there could be delays, like delays in data capture, because that HR employee has to type it word for word, line per line. So that's what you mean by manual data processing. Now, after the manual data processing, they also came up with the EDP, or electronic data processing. So sometimes it's also called Management Information Systems, or MIS. And it's the process wherein the data is then processed by a computer and its programs in an environment involving electronic communication. So this is better because it's avoiding human error since it's the computer that processes data now. Now, the real-time processing is when you have the continual input, process, and output of data. So data has to be processed in a small stipulated time or real time. Otherwise, it will create problems for the system. For example, class, you paid your tuition. So let's say your tuition, as an example, let's say your tuition is 25,000. And then you paid it, let's say today, September 8, 2022. Now, real time means in your own portal, let's say your student portal or in your student records, you will be able to see, you're already paid. And then you have a balance which shows example 0. Okay? So that means you have no more tuition to pay because you are fully paid. This is real time. Exactly at the same time, on September 8, let's say at 10:38 a.m., you already paid the tuition and it shows immediately at 10:38 a.m. of the same date that you have no balance. That's what real-time processing means. And then batch processing, this is when, let's say you're gonna get your salary. Example, let's pretend you're all seamen of Magsaysay Shipping Lines. So your salary will actually be sent in batches. So like the batch of Idasol seamen will be given their salary on the 15th or 30th of every month, just an example. Or it could be once a month only, but by batch. Then the next batch will be Ship Ahoy seamen, and so on and so forth. So that's why the batch processing transactions are collected over a period of time, and they are collected, then entered and processed during those periods. So like what I said, every 15th or every 30th, and then by batch. So in conclusion, the data processing started with the collection of the information. Then data was inputted, data was processed, and then there was the output. Last is it was stored. So that was the fundamentals of data processing. And then next session will be about system software and management. So that's the lesson for today.